Hi everyone and welcome. Dave here at East Rosebud Fly and Tackle in Billings, Montana. I don't normally tie small flies for the videos, but I think it is important that you learn how to tie them. Many people seem to be intimidated by tying small flies, and they're really not difficult. You just have to scale your materials down, your thread down, take your time, and you'll learn to do it. The boss asked me to develop a high-vis parachute midge pattern here for the shop. And this is the pattern that I came up with. This is a size 18. I also tie them in the size 20. So I'll show you how I tie this fly. First of all, let's talk about hooks a little bit. When I get down to the smaller flies, 18s and 20s, I start being concerned about hook gap. This is an size 18 fire hole. This is the number 419. It's a 2x gap. Now you compare that with a standard dry fly 18, and I think you can see there's a tremendous difference in the hooking ability of a wide gap fly. Komodo also offers an even wider gap dry fly. This is their 100W. And I know some people are going to say or think that, well, the fish will see the hook. Folks, if the fish ever noticed the hooks, we would never have caught any at all. So the hook really is not a big issue when it comes to these smaller flies. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to be using this 2x wide gap fire hole hook and make a beautiful hook. They're all nickel plated, they're all barbless, and they're all extremely sharp. For thread, I'm using 14-aught Veevus black. They also make a 16-aught thread, which would be appropriate. On my parachute flies, I like to start my thread at about the 70% point. This is where the parachute will be tied in. With small flies, every wrap of thread has a placement and a purpose. You don't use 5 wraps of thread when 1 wrap will hold the material. So that's something to keep in mind. Now for the tailing, you have several options. You can use Fibettes, you can use CDL, which I'm going to use on this fly. CDL Cody Leon comes from a special breed of chicken, and basically it's all spade hackle. Excellent tailing material. This is the Grizzly Pardo, which I like the black and white modeling for this midge pattern. And there are literally hundreds and hundreds worth of flies in this package. And you can see that the tailing fibers are very long. All you have to do is come down here where there's some web, pull that apart. The fibers are very stiff, very bright. I use what I call my third hand, which is simply a potato chip bag clip glued to a old plastic credit card and clamped to my vise. It allows me to straighten out those tips nice and use both hands to do it. Now the tailing on a parachute fly should be hook shank length. It can be a little difficult to measure that, so I'll show you a quick and easy way. You can tie it in and then adjust it. Hold your tailing material at about a 45-degree, butts down, tip up. I bring 1 soft wrap of thread around the top. It doesn't quite bring the materials to the top. Make another wrap right in front of that one and pull it straight up. Bring it around and pull it straight down. That rolls those fibers up on top of the hook perfectly every time. And now, carefully, I can adjust the length of that tail to be about hook shank length. And then reset that wrap. And then I'll wrap this down to about the 60% point, and then cut your fibers off close. Now for post material, you also have a lot of options. I like to use the McFlylon, which is a polypropylene material. You can also use other materials like turkey flats. You can use calf tail, calf body hair. The problem with those other materials is that to tie them in, you simply tie them in, stand them up. But what do you do with all of this bulk? Whether it's towards the eye or towards the tail, you have unnecessary bulk. So I'm going to be using a technique that Charlie Craven developed. He describes it extremely well in one of his books, where the post material is actually tied on perpendicular to the hook shank, so we don't have unnecessary bulk. This is the parapost material. It's not my favorite for post. It tends to be a little clingy, kind of like your ex-boyfriend or girlfriend, but it is the brightest polypropylene material that I have. So I'm just simply going to cut off about 1.5 inches or so. As is, it's a little heavy for this size fly, so I'm simply going to remove, about 1/3 of the fibers, just to slim it down a little bit. Okay, hold it approximately in the middle. Bring your thread towards the hook eye, and tying this at the 70% point. I use this trick for my beginning fly tying students as well. It's a good reminder that you don't go past this point until you're ready to, because proportions are very important on all flies, but they become critical on smaller flies. So I'm going to bring this back to that 70% point, and I'm going to twist the thread in clockwise direction. For right-handers, as you look down, clockwise will twist the thread. It not only shortens it, but it strengthens it by about 40%. And the key to tying this parachute method is tying this material in as tightly as the thread will allow. So you simply take a pinch wrap. If it's not where you want it, and 1 millimeter or 2 on a small fly can make a big difference. You can pick this back up and set it back down. After that, the material has to stay tight. I set that wrap, put another one directly on top of that. Then I'm going to swing this front end towards me, the rear end away from me just slightly, and sneak a thread wrap going crosswise. All I've done is executed an X-wrap. Okay, I didn't keep my thread tight. Shame on me. All right, and then a second wrap the same direction. So now I have 2 thread wraps going each way. Now if you haven't kept your material on top of the hook, you're going to have a few vagrant fibers here that you can use the next couple of X wraps. Kind of bundle up your 2 wings, one going across, one going back, and again going across. So you want to end up at the front of the far wing. If this post isn't tight now, it's never going to be tight. So if it's not tight, my suggestion is to redo it and add a little more thread tension. So now I'm simply going to combine these 2 wings into a single post. Unlike most other parachute methods, we are going to do everything on the post. The thread wraps, the hackle wraps, everything counterclockwise as you look down. Again, that's for a right-hander. For a left-hander, it would be opposite. The reason really becomes much more apparent in the tie-off, so I'll talk about it then. It's okay to tip it away from you slightly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make 3 tight wraps as close to the base of the post as I can get to the hook. So again, counterclockwise, bring your thread around. With every turn, I pull my thread tight. So that's the first wrap. As close to the base of the post as I can get. Pull my thread tight, bring it around a second time. One more time, around tight, tight. Then once you come around the post your last time, reestablish your normal wrap, which is clockwise for a right-hander. Now you can post the post with thread right now, and then post it again with the hackle. For a bigger fly, if you're practicing, that's perfectly okay. For a smaller fly, what it does is it adds 2 extra layers of thread, and it makes the post really unnecessarily bulky. So I am going to post the post with the hackle at the same time. Now for the hackle, I use saddle hackle. Saddle hackle has the advantage over neck or cape hackle in that it's very, very even, the entire width of it. The stem is also much more flexible than a neck hackle. The quill is thicker on a neck hackle because we're going to be asking this hackle to actually bend over backwards when we wrap it. I have seen written and heard many times where people suggest that with a parachute pattern, you use a hackle 1 size larger than the hook, which I think is baloney. I think it's kind of a carryover maybe from the 60s when the parachutes were first created, in that the hackle we had back then wasn't nearly the quality that we have today. But if you look at a parachute fly compared to a conventionally hackled fly, with a conventionally hackled fly, of course, the hackle is wrapped around the hook shank. The only thing that's supporting this fly is just a very few hackle tips. And more often than not, those hackle tips break through the meniscus and the fly is floating in the surface film. With a parachute, your hackles radiate out from the post, so you have the entire length of the hackles supporting that fly. So I see no reason in using an oversized hackle. So I'm using a size 18 Grizzly hackle. You want to strip enough of the stem of the quill so that you have enough bare stem to go from behind the eye to the base of the post, up as far as you're going to post it, and preferably with the first turn of hackle actually bare stem. That helps to keep the hackle from flaring and twisting. Now it's important in this method to keep the shiny side of the hackle towards you on your side of the hook. By now my thread has flattened well, and it'll give me the opportunity to capture it. I'm capturing this tip of the hackle on my side of the hook. Make sure that the stem isn't occluding the eye. Wrap it towards the eye, wrap it back. Now as you approach the post, stand your hackle straight up and make a couple of thread turns real close to the base of that post. What that does is it rotates that hackle and turns the inside towards the post. And for this to work, the inside, the concave side, has to face the post. So now I'm going to post both of them together, just like before. You start out at the very base of the post, wrap counterclockwise. With each wrap, I pull the thread tight. I also pull the posting material up a little bit to compress it, to keep it small. And you basically need to get about 4 wraps of hackle for a parachute. Any more than that is just icing on the cake. When you get to the top where you want to stop, start coming back down. Make your first wrap right over the last one to keep this post even. And I am wrapping this with a flattened thread. The smoother your thread wraps are, the smoother your hackle will wrap. When I reach the bottom of the post, I again take one turn in the regular direction in front of the post, and then I'll come back behind it. Now if you're building a larger mayfly, you can use your thread at this point to create a more tapered body before we do the body itself. Since this is the Midge, I want to keep this small. I'm simply going to wrap a nice smooth thread base. Now I'm going to stop, as you'll see, just short of where I tied the tail, and the reason is I'm going to be using a Byot. A Byot comes from the leading edge of a primary feather. This is the most outer wing feather on a bird. This is from a Canada goose, a wild bird, and I recommend that you don't cut the Byots off, pull them off. Simply get your tweezers in there and strip it off. This gives you the extra length. Now this Byot is a little deceiving in that it looks like it's unicolor, but it's actually got a nice ribbing effect on it. All Byots have what I call a hard edge and a soft edge. The hard edge is the leading edge of the Byot. This occurs on the top part of the wing. This reinforces this feather. This feather takes more abuse on the bird than any other feather. This is the primary airfoil on that front wing. So as you pull the Byot off, every Byot you'll see, they'll have a slightly cupped side on one. The other edge will be what I call the hard edge. Depending on how you wrap this in, you can wrap your Byot so that you have the hard edge following each wrap, and that edge will stand up and give you a nice ribbed appearance, or you can wrap it with the hard edge leading, and then each subsequent wrap will wrap over that and it'll give you a nice smooth body. You'll still get segmentation either way. So I have pre-dampened a couple of Byots here. I do want this to be a smooth body, so I'm going to tie this in with the hard edge proceeding. So the reason I've left a slight gap here is because this Byot has some width to it. I want to tie this Byot in so that my first wrap, the rear edge of the Byot, will be even with where my tails were tied in, but not disturb the tie down. So again, my thread is flattened by now. I'm simply going to capture this Byot on my side of the hook. Make sure that I have my width appropriate. And then carefully just wrap that tip down. You can see what I'm saying about my posting material being a little clingy. You really don't want to catch that in your wraps. And make a nice smooth thread base all the way to the back of your post. All right, I like to use some very thin head cement as a little bit of structural integrity underneath that Byot before I wrap it, although I've never had one come apart. So I've thinned this down about the consistency of water, and it just takes a tiny touch of head cement there. You have to make certain on your first wrap of your Byot that you don't allow it to twist. Grab it with your hackle pliers. We're actually going to be folding it over itself. So your first wrap, pull the Byot away from you so it's nice and flat. Make your first wrap, and if you've tied it in correctly, your first wrap will be right at the edge of where you tied in the tail. Now I don't know if you can see this, but right here you can see the hard edge starting to flare, and that tells me that I've tied the Byot in the way I wanted it to. And as I wrap it, then the ribbing stands out, which is what I wanted. I'm going to wrap this all the way up to the rear of the post. With a soft thread wrap, simply fold it down over, tighten it, and take another thread wrap over that one. Just 2, not 5. Reach in, clip that off as closely as you can. You'll have a little bit of a tab of a Byot there, but that's fine, it'll be covered. Then I make one more wrap going back, just to make sure I have that Byot secured. Well, you're going to use just a little bit of dubbing here to make the thorax. I'm using UV2, fine and dry. They're black dubbing. For small flies in particular, I really like their dubbing. It's not only very fine, but it's very consistently fine. It's not kinky like some of the other dry fly dubbings are, so it's very easy to use. We're going to apply this very, very lightly, and we're basically just going to cover the thread. So you just pick a few filaments, almost too small to see. Always wrap your dubbing in a clockwise direction. As you wrap it, your thread tightens as you wrap clockwise, and it keeps your dubbing tight. Always overlap your next bit of dubbing with the previous one. And again, I'm just using just a barely few strands of dubbing. And if you have a thin spot like I do up here, you can build that up. So we're going to start off with just a couple of inches of dubbing. Nice, tight, and small. Going to build a thorax. The thorax is really the largest part on any insect. It contains the muscles for all 6 legs and both pairs of wings. So we're going to simulate that by just taking some X-wraps in front and back of the post. Also helps to cover up a little bit our tie-in for our post material. Just a little more here. All right, one more wrap to the back. So you want to end up at the front of the post with about 1 inch of dubbing on your thread. The dubbing is there, as you'll see, not only to lift the hackle as we tie it off, but also to finish the head. And what we're going to do is bend this hackle over backwards. So make sure all your post material is clear. You can see I have some bare quill left there. The inside of the feather must face up, so it'll be like an upside down umbrella. Make your first wrap of hackle right at the top of your post. Again, that first wrap is bare hackle. That prevents that hackle from flaring. Also helps to keep the hackle from twisting. I'm just going to make 4 wraps, one under the other. Your last wrap, bring the hackle down and towards you. We're going to trap this hackle against the post. Now as I bring this thread around counterclockwise, I use the dub portion of this thread to help sweep those hackle fibers up. So 1 turn, 2 turns. On the last turn, I come in front of the post, reestablish my normal thread wrap, make 2 turns, and I have just enough dubbing to fit behind the eye. Now don't cut your hackle yet. If somehow you mishandle your whip finish and things come unwound, you can still recover. If you cut your hackle off now and that happens, you're basically back to retying the entire fly. Now the real charm of this method is the way the hackle folds upwards away from the hook eye. And as you'll see the whip finish, these hackles kick up away from the thread. In a more conventional type of pattern, they have you tie in the hackle at the base of the post, wrap the hackle, forcing it up the post, and then you're supposed to whip finish on the bottom of the post. The whole time these hackle fibers are down and getting caught on the thread. With this method, it makes for an extremely clean tie-off. So I'm just going to do a normal 3-wrap whip finish, but watch those hackle fibers. Slow rotations, those hackle fibers kick up and out of the way. I catch none in my whip finish. Then tighten that knot down. It makes for a very pretty fly. It also makes for a very durable fly. Now once I have the thread removed, come in with my scissors tips just barely open and clip off that excess hackle. Lastly, I like to trim the post material to about the same height as I have hackled on the post. Remember, this is supposed to be high vis. It's not supposed to be a searchlight. And then lastly, I use that very thin head cement again. Put just a tiny amount at the top of the post on the hackles. This will not stick to the hackle. It's not even a full drop. Let that soak into the post. And then I wipe my bodkin till it's basically just damp, and then put a little bit behind the eye. Now if I'm tying a fly with light dubbing, then I dispense of the cement because it can discolor the dubbing. So there you have it. It's a size 18 high-vis parachute midge with a Biot body. It's really not a difficult fly to tie. Take your time, slow down, and learn to make every thread wrap count. As always, thanks for joining in. If you have any questions or comments, please let us know. See you next time.